So on this panel, we have our panelists here, and then there's one panelist who is participating virtually, Virginia Watring, who's a professor at the International Space University in France. Joel is the ISS program manager for NASA, and he's going to serve as the moderator of this panel, Joel Montalbano. He was appointed to this leadership position in 2020. He began his career at Rockwell and later served as a NASA flight director from 2000 to 2008. And subsequently, he was the director of NASA's human space flight program in Russia. In 2012, he became the deputy program manager for NASA's space station program, and he brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to his current position as the ISS program manager. So Joel, hand it over to you.
Well, thank you. And let's see, can you guys hear us online? All right, I'm getting thumbs up, so that's awesome. So first of all, thank you guys for participating today. Pretty cool to be the International Space Station Program Manager right now. 25 years ago, on December 6th, we mated the first 2 modules of the International Space Station, and we've been rocking and rolling ever since. You saw a picture up there early of the full International Space Station, and it's just unbelievable. And it's crazy to think what we've been able to accomplish over the 25 years. And it's just with domestic and especially international participation, we do have, I think, one of the best laboratories ever. And we've demonstrated international cooperation as the model of how it can be across the globe. So pretty impressive. We have a number of panelists today. What I'd like to do is just go around and let the panelists introduce themselves, say a little bit about their history, and then we have a number of questions. And then if somebody who's ever watching time would just kind of give me a heads up when we have about 15 minutes left, or we'll talk all morning, because this is one of the coolest things we get to do. So, Shep, why don't we start here? Shep, why don't you go, and then we'll go from right to left. Just an introduction of who you are. You got some pretty cool panelists today, and so you'll be impressed.
Okay, Bill Shepard. I spent 18 years with NASA. Prior to that, I was a Navy SEAL in East and West Coast assignments, along with a special guest, Dr. Frank Butler, who was a classmate of mine back in 1971, also a Navy SEAL. My role at NASA, I flew as a mission specialist 3 times on the shuttle, and then got involved in program management of the International Space Station in the period where it was transitioned from the previous Freedom work into what the ISS is today. And then I was fortunate to fly on the first expedition in late 2000 with Sergei Krikalev and Yuri Gidzenko. And we had about a 140-day mission, and we were basically managing the early construction of the first elements, bringing the U.S. lab aboard, and then handing over to the next crew. So that's my background, and I'm still engaged in, not so much in the space industry, but my current interest is in promoting engineering education. I mentor college teams across the country and some of their senior design projects.
Awesome, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Chris Lanehart, and I am an associate professor at the Baylor College of Medicine in the Center for Space Medicine and in the Department of Emergency Medicine. And my clinical job is working at the Ben Taub Hospital across the street in the emergency department. So generally, if you're in Houston and you're showing up at Ben Taub, it's because you've had a major trauma, and so you don't want to see me there, and I hope I never see you there either. My NASA job, I for 6 years now have been the element scientist for exploration medical capability in the NASA Human Research Program, and our task is to help advance medical system design and risk-informed decision-making for exploration missions beyond low Earth orbit. Good morning.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Ginger Carrick. I'm a NASA retiree. I worked there from 91 to 2021, so for 30 years. And a lot of that time was spent with Space Station, and this man right over here, I was assigned to train him in the early years, him and Sergey and Yuri, to get ready for space station operations.
And you see what happened.
But I was there for the birth of space station, from taking it from requirement space up into real space, and so it's kind of like my baby. And Joel grew up with me out in Russia, out there. I was also NASA's first non-astronaut to hold the position of Capcom in mission control. I did that for several years before becoming a flight director and flying numerous space station and shuttle missions. Then I went on to a series of progressively more responsibility and leadership roles at NASA. My last role, I was Deputy Director of the Exploration, Integration, and Science Directorate, which was charged with trying to take all of the lessons that we have learned on ISS and help us get ready for the Artemis missions. I currently am the Chief Strategy Officer for Barrios Technology, which is a woman-owned business, aerospace business in the Houston area that has been doing business with NASA for 40 years and is currently branching out and working with all these new commercial companies to take everything we know and try and help them succeed both in low Earth orbit and beyond. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, good morning. My name is Serena Anand-Chancellor. I'm actually stepping in for Dr. Kate Rubens, who has her military duty this weekend, so she is with the Army currently. I hold a lot of hats right now, but I started off my career at UTMB training in internal medicine and aerospace medicine, and then became a flight surgeon for NASA, spent a lot of time in Star City operations. Entered the astronaut corps in 2009, and then flew to station for 197 days in 2018. Worked with almost everybody here at this table during that time period, either as a flight surgeon or as an astronaut. Currently, I do still work for CB, and my life has gotten a lot harder since Michael Barrett was assigned to flight, because now I get all his tasking. So I spend my time working there. I also am the program director for UTMB's Aerospace Medicine Residency Program, and we are moving and shaking things down there, and we have a lot of our residents here today. It's really good to see everybody here. I'm also an academic internist at LSU in Baton Rouge. So kind of like Chris, if you're on my service, you've either had a myocardial infarction or you are septic, and so you don't want to see me either. But at least you've made it past the gates of Chris. So, but no, I enjoy every bit of it. I'm also a mom of a 5-month-old and a 22-month-old, and so they are watching, I think, with my husband. This will be their first ISMS ever, perhaps the youngest ever participants, but glad to be here today.
Awesome, awesome. All right, let's go online here. Mikhail, please introduce yourself.
Да, я услышал. Михаил Корниенко, участник экспедиции на МКС-15, участник, это дублирующая экспедиция была, 23-24 у меня экспедиция, 176 суток основная, и следующая была годовая экспедиция вместе со Скоттом Келли, 340 суток, и мы делали эксперимент, в основном fluid shift, который был направлен на дальние перелеты в космическое пространство, поэтому мне очень интересна эта конференция, и спасибо всем, кто меня пригласил на столь представительное собрание. Спасибо, я очень горд этим событием.
And Mikhail Kornienko, I've spent 1 year with Scott Kelly, 340 days, fluid shifts mostly, and also I would like to take this opportunity to thank for inviting me here. It's really a great pleasure for me to be here. Thank you so much.
She was able to hear us earlier. Virginia.
Let me try this. Hey, Ginger, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
Hello. Bonjour tout le monde. But you don't need to ask for the translator. I am Virginia Wittring. I'm a professor at International Space University in Strasbourg, France. Some of you know me from the Houston area. I am an adjunct faculty member at Baylor College of Medicine in the Center for Space Medicine in the Department of Pharmacology and Chemical Biology there. I am former chief scientist and deputy director of the Translational Research Institute for Space Health. Worked previously also at NSBRI and was with pharmacology research at JSC for some time. If you run into me professionally, it's okay. There's nothing wrong at all.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you very much. All right, Yuri, can you hear me? And why don't you go ahead and do your introduction?
Yes, I do. So, good morning, everyone. Yuri Smirnov from Institute for Biomedical Problems. So, I came to IBMP more about 20 years as a student for development of scientific payloads for biomedical investigations on board the International Space Station. But it took not long time to fall in love with the space life science. And I now am responsible for development of scientific experiments both on the Earth and in space. So my main goal is to make the science, biomedical science, as a system at IBMP and for interests of Roscosmos and for the whole humanity as well. Thank you. You're welcome. Good morning one more time.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And then just a little background on me. I started here in 1988 with Rockwell and in the group called Proximity Operations, responsible for helping the astronauts design retrievals and captures of satellites, as well as deployment of satellites. A couple other things, I became a flight director. I was also flight director, as Ginger mentioned. I ran our NASA operations in Russia and Kazakhstan from 2008 to 2012. Came back here, was deputy ISS program manager, and then just 3 years ago became the ISS program manager. Seems like more than that, but it's only been 3 years. I'm also someone you can visit. I'm safe to visit. And so thank you guys again for everybody for participating. Ginger, let's start with you. Ginger Carrick. We'll get this fixed here. Not too many times you have two Gingers. So, Ginger Carrick, in your experience, what has been the most significant or impactful medical or human research conducted aboard the space station?
Thanks, Joel. I love to get this question. I do a lot of outreach, and people always ask, why are you going up there? What do we get out of it? And I think this is the area that resonates with most people. How can it benefit my health? And I like, I'm also a physicist, so I love the protein crystal growth experiments that we do up there, and I think they have the potential to have the greatest impact all over the world, but they also allow for participation from anywhere in the world. So, for example, there was one that we used to do in Russia, the crystallizator experiment, and now that's showing promise for helping address tuberculosis. There was another Japanese experiment whose name I don't remember, but it was addressed looking at multiple muscular dystrophy. And so we have those types of experiments, and there's some U.S. experiments that are now looking at breast cancer and trying to, make treatments easier and finding cures or at least finding medicines that you can take to prevent it. So that's, I think, is what resonates most with me because it can impact the widest array of people.
Awesome. Thank you. So, Chris, you're going to get the second one. And we're going to do maybe one round of questions, and then we'll open it up to you to ask questions. And if you don't have any questions, I have another round of questions. So, all right. So, Chris, how do teams on the ground support space medicine and medical advancements on board the International Space Station?
Thanks for the question. So I'd like to address this in two different ways. So the first one, and I'm going to give you an example for each. The first one is a few years ago, did a medical technology demonstration on space station for a white blood cell analyzer. It's a type of capability that we have in the hospital, but does not and has not ever existed in spaceflight before. And what we really wanted to do is just figure out if the thing worked. So we took a commercially available device, we modified it for the space environment, we flew it to space, and the first astronaut who tried to use it totally didn't work. And it wasn't because it hadn't been modified well, and it wasn't because we hadn't tried to think through the procedures, but we hadn't really done enough testing before we flew to know if the procedures were going to work. And so this was a great example of where the ground and the astronauts worked together to redo the procedure. And so we modified the procedure in mission. We were able to then perform the test and it was very successful. And we showed that these devices can work in the space environment and return clinically accurate and useful information. And so in that first example, I think that the ground and the folks in space working together to real time make changes and modify procedures and protocols and come up with new ideas to solve problems is a great way that the ground can help. But the second one, frankly, is that the ground can help prepare the astronauts to take care of themselves. And so another technology demonstration I'm going to give you as an example is something that we're working on called the Autonomous Medical Officer Support Software. And the idea here is that astronauts are relatively smart, capable people who could probably do a lot of really great things on their own, and they don't always need somebody talking them through how to do it. So we created a kidney and bladder ultrasound module, a software module. We didn't show it to any of the astronauts before they flew. They went into space. We told them to turn on the module. We told them to turn off the radio, and their job as untrained people was to get a good picture of the kidneys and the bladder using ultrasound. And the first few images were not great, but very quickly they got up to clinically useful, accurate images that they were sending to the ground, and people on the ground said, this is perfect. I could use this to make a diagnosis if I needed to. And so I would say that the ground has many roles. Of course, it's going to be real time helping the astronauts and the crew and the people on station to do their job as best as they possibly can. And then the next part in the future, as we push into deep space, is to help prepare them to be more autonomous over time and allow the astronauts to take care of themselves and their vehicle more autonomously.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see, Serena, you have kind of a unique perspective being able to work medical on the ground as well as in orbit. And besides the obvious of the microgravity, tell us a little bit about how things differ between the two environments.
Yeah, so when you get to do, medical research on ISS, besides the fact that it is the coolest thing ever, because I can work on any surface, right? So I can maximize the use of any surface on that module to do science. So frequently what folks don't see a lot of times during the day is when we're doing research on ISS, say in the U.S. lab, we've got 4 people in there working on all different sides of the U.S. lab conducting science. I think one of the most unique aspects that also folks don't see is when I perform, especially medical research, I've got cameras looking at me from all angles, cameras looking at the science, high definition cameras. I've got direct communication with the PI, the principal investigator. So my questions, any questions that I may have to make sure the science is successful are answered really in under 10 seconds. And I'll be honest, a lot of the medical research that we performed up there, and Ginger mentioned a lot of the protein crystal growth experiments, which we loved. A lot of that was looking at Parkinson's disease targets, what they call the LRRK2 gene. And so for us as crew working on a lot of this science, it actually is very meaningful to us. Because at the end of our day, what do you think we talk about around the dinner table? Literally, around the dinner table. We talk about the science that we did that day. And so we have gotten so good on ISS at being very, very efficient with performing these experiments. In fact, several times during the mission, as I was doing an experiment, especially human research, I remember thinking, wow, this is really well put together. And that's not without the hard work of a lot of folks on the ground prior to that whole experiment even launching. Because realize we don't get briefed on probably 80% of the science that we do until we get up there. We don't see it. So we have to get briefed on orbit, and yes, as Chris mentioned, we're pretty smart people, but I will argue we need a lot of help a lot of the times. And we also don't want to mess this science up. This is someone's life work for years, right? So we take that very, very seriously. So yes, it's a lot of fun, but we take it very seriously to make sure we maximize the output.
Awesome, thank you. Let's see, Shep, next one is yours. You were there in the beginning. You've been following us and keeping an eye on us and helping us guide as we've gone through these 25 years. In your opinion, why is medical and human research aboard Space Station important to society, and what's really important as we look forward and continue the International Space Station?
Well, I think you got to see the work on Space Station in a larger context. Probably most of the folks here remember 25 years ago, there was a lot of doubt that the space station was even going to happen. And this was particularly expressed by our international partners who had worked in some cases for 8 or 10 years on building a cooperative platform, and NASA was kind of waffling around about what was going to happen. And many expressed the opinion that it wasn't possible. So one of the highlights of the team that we have now is they made this relatively impossible thing work and work well. I think it speaks to kind of the character of us as a society, maybe even as a civilization, that we have to have a sense of mission in what we do. And we certainly had that on Expedition 1. We saw ourselves as the pioneers in basically reinvigorating some of the techniques and skills we would need to do exploration. And I think that's probably, in my mind, the most important aspect of what space station's about. I don't know what kind of paint they put on the outside of the space station, because it's the largest stealth program that this country has ever run. Nobody on the street knows that we have a space station. We have 7 people who essentially don't live on this planet anymore. And what's up with that? But that's kind of a joke about the current, if you will, lack of interest, if you will, in the general society about what NASA and its partners are doing. Hugely important. It's a central part of who we are as a spacefaring civilization. I think that's the key message.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, now we'll go to our online panelists. Ginger, we'll start with you online. What is the biggest challenge for the health of the crews living in space, and how is research aboard space station helping to address those issues? And then a part 2, you get a bonus question. How is the information we are learning about living in space helping humans back on Earth?
These are great questions. And my colleague Chris Leonhardt already started pointing you in the direction of the answer here with the word autonomy. Excuse me. I think preparing crew to be able to take care of themselves independently of the ground, the physical resources that could come from the ground with resupply, or the advice, the communications that could happen now on station, but it's not feasible in the future on an exploration mission. Preparing for this autonomy is all important right now. The crew need to be able to operate independently, and that means, in the case of health, diagnosing correctly, making a treatment plan that's feasible with the equipment and resources they have on board, and with the personnel and the training that they have. So setting that up is a little bit of that's a daunting prospect, but Chris's group, Exploration Medical Capability, is already working along those lines. And I think that ISS is a magnificent resource for these preparations. This is our testing ground, right? We can try things out in various Earth analogs, prepare ourselves, and then really try them in space on the ISS before we have to go fully autonomous. And I'd like to add that these activities, these preparation activities on ISS, would make a magnificent public relations attention getter. Rather than having ISS operate as a stealth lab, perhaps we could be using it a little bit better to capture public attention for exploration capabilities going forward. And you asked about Earth returns, Earth benefits of all this work. There are lots of environments on Earth that are remote or low resource or undependably provided with resources. Remote locations, scientific expeditions, military expeditions, those situations need to be able to act autonomously. Areas with poor infrastructure or unreliable infrastructure can benefit from what we learn for space missions. Right now we have many situations on Earth that could benefit from how we are taking care of crew members in space, and certainly from how we could do this in the future with better in-flight capabilities. So I'm really excited about being able to develop this whole next generation of care. It's a big paradigm shift from what's been done in the past.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Let's see, next one for you, Mikhail. So you had a unique perspective. You flew almost a year continuous on orbit. I'd like to know what surprised you the most in space, and besides Scott Kelly's gorilla suit, and what was your favorite research or medical experiment that you were able to accomplish on board?
Ну, костюм гориллы, конечно, это amazing. Я подумал, что некоторое время, что я в параллельное пространство попал, когда я его увидел. Вот. С другой стороны, я бы хотел обозначить одну тему, которая волнует меня и, в общем-то, волнует всех астронавтов и космонавтов, которые возвращаются после полета. Вот. Медицина уделяет внимание всем системам и органам человека после приземления. Это сердечно-сосудистая система, кровеносная, там, ну и так далее, и так далее. Можно перечислять много. Вот. Страдает в основном опорно-двигательный аппарат. И страдает сильно. Опухают коленки, болит позвоночник. И если нам идти дальше в космос, я имею в виду, если нам лететь на Марс, у нас нет такой роскоши отлеживаться 10 дней, как вот мы это делаем на Земле. Нужны какие-то методы понимания, что происходит с хрящевой тканью, с суставной, ну в том числе с межпозвоночными дисками, потому что, ну не секрет, позвоночник расширяется, мы подрастаем сантиметра на 3-4. После приземления все это компрессуется, защемляются нервные корешочки, да, это болезненные процессы. Чтобы работать на поверхности планеты после приземления, после посадки эффективно, нужно понимание, как купировать вот эти процессы. Я говорил об этом.
Да, давайте, извините, пожалуйста.
Да. Извините, да.
Well, first of all, that gorilla outfit, oh my, that was...
Еще раз спасибо большое. So Yuri, tell us a little bit about, in this area of human research and medical on board space station, what excites you the most? What is the most enjoyable activities that you get to either help design or to work with others on?
So for me, the first of all is very interesting to combine results of different investigations of different systems.
Okay.
So it's very interesting to combine different results of different investigations, of course, because we must understand what was the medical state of each person who was taking part in the experiment, what could affect on this person, and we got the result we see in front of us. So, of course, to look at the results in combination of different factors and different systems. Of course, very interesting are biological experiments. I know that the crew members very like to take part in these experiments. For example, we just a few days ago started the new experiment with a quail on board the space station, and it was interesting that cosmonauts were very active to take part in this experiment. So to see the result and to see the interest of the crew members in the science, it's the most amazing for us, the people developing the science in space.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So, like I said, I have a list of questions, but let me open up to the floor here and for people to ask questions. And then if you're quiet, I'll go back to my list. So let me open up to the room here. Any questions in the room? You got a pretty impressive panel here, both here and online. Experience just unbelievable experience. So please take the opportunity and ask a question. Nothing?
No, we got one.
So what's the most significant medical emergency that y'all have had on the space station?
So the question was, what is the most significant medical emergency you've had on board the space station? Luckily, so far, nothing's that's required medical evacuation, and that's the important part. You know, interestingly, just anecdotally from what I saw during my time years past, I mean, let's talk about what we frequently see. We frequently see musculoskeletal strain, sprain. We see small lacerations, some that require, you know, steri strips at most. Urinary retention we've seen, certainly on launch during both shuttle, station. You know, early in the days of Apollo, you know, there was the case of questionable urosepsis, so that was actually a pretty significant event. You know, but with time and people, it's just statistics, right? At some point, we're going to see something worse. You know, and that's the interesting thing. When you look at ISS, and we have some panels a little bit later talking about this, we have tremendous capability on ISS. Number one, we've got all this room. We've got tons of kits, people pretty well trained. We've actually, for the most, at least past number of missions, had a physician on board, and that was not because a physician is assigned to every flight, but by happenstance happened to be part of the crew. And so, you know, we can do a lot up there. Now, I'm not going to overblow that capability because we're going to talk about that later, but we can sustain a lot of different conditions on orbit. We can treat, we can monitor, and if we have to, you know, then we can consider coming home. I get the question a lot, though, of, well, if they're just sick, just bring them home. That is not an easy question to answer. That is a probably $1 billion question that you are answering right there if you plan to de-man station. And we would do that if we had to save the life of somebody, but that is not, you can't just turn station off and whoop, scoot right on down. And so it's just so complicated. But, you know, again, time and people, we'll see what happens.
Let's see, from a program standpoint, I'll add a couple things. We have a unique opportunity with low Earth orbit that we regularly have visiting vehicles that can augment what's on board with medicines. So about every 2 months we'll have a vehicle going up, and so if there is something that happens on board, we can augment with medical. Also, from the other thing that I see from a program side is, especially with the increase in the rodent research, we see a lot of allergy type with our astronauts on board. And allergies, that, you know, that'll drive a lot of things, right? You're not as quick if you're really suffering from allergies. You may not be able to go do a spacewalk, a critical spacewalk that we need to go do. So those are some big things there. The other thing, and Serena mentioned it, if we have to unman space station, that's a big deal for us. So there's some critical spacewalks, the critical failures that we have on orbit. We can tolerate one major failure and not have any impact to the crew safety or the vehicle, but we have to go out and fix that before you have the second failure. And if you have that second failure, that could be a big deal depending on what has failed outside. Any other panel members want to add anything? Either, well, let me start in the room and then I'll offer to online. Anybody in the room here? Okay, how about online? Anybody want to add anything? If not, we'll go to the next question. Okay.
Hey, Joel, I've got a question. So over the past 23 years of continuous human presence on the International Space Station, we've seen science complexity ramp up incredibly. You just mentioned rodent research. For those in the room, I wonder if the panel could talk a little bit about exactly how we've been able to accomplish that, whether it's the number of crew members, it's the capabilities, it's the time to do the valuable science. But looking forward to the future, do you see that complexity ramping up continuously, or are we going to hit an inflection point where sending samples home for more analytics is the better choice, or continuing to enable iterative research on orbit and minimizing the amount of samples that are going home?
I'll start, and then people can, so I'll tell you that the first, 10 years of space station was based on assembly. Get it built, and get it done. And then we've transitioned from that to making science a priority. What's the difference? So in the assembly days, you work on the building space station, and then if you have time left over, you do science. After 10 years, we changed that. We said, okay, no, this is how we're going to work now. Science gets the first cut. And then after science, we're going to fit everybody else. So we didn't make a lot of people happy, but it was the right thing to do, and we're going to continue doing that. Now having 7 crew members up there, so the U.S. crew vehicle gives us a 4th crew member. That person, the extra time that person brings, we fully dedicated to science now, and the plan is to continue that through the end of space station. And then as far as bringing samples down, that's probably one of the biggest challenges in space station is return, right? There's a lot of requirements sometimes on return. From cold stowage, you need to be at a minus 80 degree temperature. And then, as soon as you hit Earth, gravity, starts affecting your samples, as you guys are well aware. And so we are pushing a lot of what we can do on orbit and analyze on orbit. It makes it faster, makes it quicker, gets data down to people faster, but we have a lot of work to do, but we got some time to do. Like I said, we're rocking and rolling through the end of 2030. Joel's opinion is we'll probably go a little more. We can't have a gap in low Earth orbit. That's a terrible plan for anybody. And so while we have these commercial LEO destinations that are being designed, we want those to work, and we will get out of the way. We will go from a space station, I say, to a submarine, because we don't want to compete against them when it's time. But until they get there, we need to rock and roll on space station. And I'll start with Shep here, and a couple other people have comments, and then we'll go online.
So it's a big area of discussion, but let me give you some context. I think it's a learning curve that we've been through, a big one. The first crew had to deal with some things that are not really common knowledge, but I'll spill the beans. When we got up to turn things on and get the computer networks up, we had a thing called a payload support computer. Yeah. And this thing would not run correctly. It kept crashing. And this was where all of our basically support activities and some of our science was located in various applications on this computer. And we had lots of conversations with the ground. They would say, no, just, do a Control-Alt-Delete, shut everything down, reboot it. And this went on for a week or two. And so it finally worked out that this computer had 44 separate applications loaded on it that were all trying to run and get memory and do I/O and all these other things that computers do. But the people who managed this, and I'm not sure who they were even, but they had never operated this computer with all 44 things trying to run at the same time, or being active together. And so it took a while to sort that out. But that was like one of the lessons that was learned early on, that these things have to be integrated and correctly tested on the ground, because you can't depend on this working in space if you haven't tested it. Another quick data point, we had a treadmill that was a new design, and we ran on that for about maybe a month or so. Then we basically started breaking the tread on it, and it turned out that this treadmill, which was supposedly going to have a design life of thousands of hours of use in space, had only been qual tested for less than 1 hour of somebody running on it. And so these are some of the lessons that I think we've learned that make our productivity a lot better now in space station than it was in the early days. But we should not forget these lessons.
Chris, Ginger?
I'll just add that, as we move closer and closer toward the end of ISS, your natural instinct from a science perspective may be to, maximize it. Let's get everything we can out of it. But at the same time, what Chris was talking about is conducting science beyond low Earth orbit is going to be very different, and you have to provide that autonomy. So you need to figure out what balance you want to strike. Do I want to maximize everything I can from the science perspective, or do I want to maximize everything I can to learn how to operate as a scientist beyond low Earth orbit? So they'll have some tough, these program managers over here will have some tough choices moving forward.
Sure. Liz, to address your question directly, I think the in situ capabilities are going to be critical for a number of reasons. The first one, of course, is that sample return, as we're seeing now with early Artemis, and trying to even think about coming back with something from Mars is going to be, if it's not a rock, nobody's going to let you bring it. So the ability to do in situ analysis, both for clinical purposes and research purposes, I think is going to be critical to accomplishing the mission, which in some of these cases is going to be bringing back as many rocks as you can. But moreover, I think the other thing is that we can speed up the pace of science by doing in situ analysis. Because if you have to wait to answer a question until you come back, and then you come up with a new question, then design a new experiment, and then wait to fly that pace of discovery is simply too slow. And we need to be able to increase that speed, and we do that through in situ analysis capabilities.
Yeah, I think one of the things that surprises people is they believe on ISS we know everything we can about the human during the whole mission, and we have relatively little insight into the majority of your major organ systems. The eyes are awesome. We have OCT, we have ultrasound, we have endoscopy, and this is real time, right? But if I could have that for every organ system, let's just say bone, if I had some insight as to how we were, the architecture throughout the mission, it would give me time points, but all I have is a black box, essentially. So completely agree with Chris. I think human research should continue to just exponentially, our capabilities. Animal research, we still need to do it. That will probably level off at a point. But with humans, RNA sequencing, DNA sequencing, we've already done that on orbit. We've done that tech demo. We've proven we can do it. So how do we utilize that?
Awesome. Let's see, online, any comments? Raise your hand. Okay, Yuri, since you put your hand up, we'll let you go first, and then we'll see if the other participants want to add anything.
So, first of all, I would like to say that, yes, if we're talking about the International Space Station, it's a lab. So each lab needs to have a tools and a personnel. So, yes, of course, we have a excellent personnel, the crew members, and I must say that it's a very big challenge to develop the analytical equipment to make analysis on board the space station. So we need to descend a lot of samples to the Earth. And of course, if we talk about the flights into the deep space, we must again look at the human being, at the biological object as a system. But the data we can take from it, which signals electrical, which samples like blood, urine, and so on. And so we may combine all some equipment to be used, which may be used for different PIs to get the data for different investigations. I think so.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, any of our online panels have comments for this question? If not, we'll go to another question. Okay, Mikhail?
По-моему, в силу технических причин меня не услышали. Я бы хотел еще раз акцентироваться. Весь второй полет годовой, 340 суток, мы со Скоттом Келли исследовали зрение. А я с каким зрением улетел, с таким прилетел, с глазным давлением также.
Okay.
А ходить я не мог, что после первого полета, что после второго. Очевидно, что с хрящевой тканью происходит деградация, изменения. И если мы хотим идти дальше, глубже в космос, эти изменения нужно понимать и понимать методы их купирования. Это касается как коленок, так позвоночника, в меньшей степени рук. Спасибо большое.
Спасибо. Okay, we have a question here in the room.
Yes, talking about future again, what about medical capabilities? What would be the critical medical capabilities that can, have to be included in Gateway, for example? Of course, it's much smaller, smaller module, much shorter missions, and smaller crew. But some certain medical capabilities have to be included anyway. Emergencies may still happen. Crew may stay longer than planned, and so on. So what is considered the most critical medical capability that has to be included there based on ISS experience? Thank you.
All right, I'll start. It's a really fascinating question to try to answer, and I think that one of the challenges that we have is that if we ask 10 different people what they think we need to take, they'll tell us 10 different answers. So what we're trying to do right now within exploration medical capability is generate the tools that we need with the best available evidence to help us to come up with a systematic and repeatable answer to that question. And so what we've done is we're designing a probabilistic risk assessment tool and a trade space analysis tool called IMPACT. What we are doing as part of that effort is gathering information on all of the conditions that have occurred in spaceflight, the conditions with the highest likelihood or consequence of occurring in spaceflight, and then using the probabilities of the onset of those conditions, we're trying to then map those conditions to all of the capabilities and resources necessary to treat those conditions. But we also recognize that we will never be able to take, never's a long time. It's very unlikely we will be able to take a hospital to space anytime in the near future. And so as a result, we have to then figure out how we determine what the true value is of the things that we fly. And so the example we use a little bit facetiously here is a defibrillator. We fly an automatic external defibrillator to space. We have never used it, thank goodness. Is that a good way to use our mass and volume when we send people to the moon or to Mars? Or should we use that mass and volume for other purposes that are more likely to be used? And so we're hoping to use IMPACT to help us get a good answer to that question. And as each mission changes, and as the number of people change, and their duration in space changes, and their distance from Earth changes, the answer to that question will also change. And so our hope is that we can use this type of tool to come up with a pretty good estimate of what each mission should have from a medical perspective, and that will then be massaged and tailored by the people who are preparing and planning for those missions.
So I kind of look at it, when you go into an ER or you go into an urgent care and you tell the physician that you have a complaint, that you have a pain or an ache or something somewhere, unless it's visibly apparent what you have, rash, a laceration, something that we say, this is clearly the answer. The physician uses their clinical judgment and then they pull on their ancillary support. So if they can't readily see what is causing your belly pain, what do they go for? We look at blood. Right? We look at urine, and we get some sort of diagnostic imaging, right? It really comes down to those three things, okay? And we've got all our specialists and everybody to help us look at those, and that's, we're not going to have all those specialists readily available right there, or will we, right? With some sort of automated or algorithmic-based assistance. But when you break it down, what sort of diagnostic imaging have we used on ISS to this day that we will take beyond, because we can get it really, really small, and that's ultrasound. Period. Unless you know of any other device that we can use for imaging, many CT scans, many MRIs, we don't have them, right? So I certainly think ultrasound will be one of the biggest things, and we've used that successfully on ISS for many years. Similar to what Chris said, they have sent up things to folks who are completely untrained, and it may start off a little rough, but we get pretty darn good after a while at using ultrasound. Non-physician astronauts, okay? So that certainly will be there to a degree. What I'd love to see us do more and more of on ISS so that we can translate it to the moon, to Gateway, is in situ analysis. Can I get a CBC? Can I get a chemistry panel? And get those results in 10 minutes, okay? So that's certainly what I would like to see.
It's kind of a tangential answer to your question, but I think most of the focus of the discussion this morning has been on the physiological well-being of the people flying in space. I see an equal dimension to the psychological compatibility of the crews on long, dangerous, isolated missions, and I don't think we pay enough attention to that. I don't know what the medical intervention is. I can offer one aspect of how it was dealt with early on in the space station program. We found that alcohol worked really well after training sessions and was a big factor in building a cohesive crew and good relationships among the team members. I don't know that we would do that on a space mission, but measures like that I think are going to be exceedingly important. I don't think we are really addressing it. So.
For the record, alcohol is bad for our life support system.
That's true.
One other thing I'll add is, you talk about medicine, but I think what's equally important is our exercise equipment, right? So, and many of you guys are smarter than this on this subject than me, but we have the luxury in low Earth orbit of some pretty awesome exercise equipment on board with ARED and TVIS and CVIS, and so we have to do some other exercise equipment on space station that's much smaller. Because we're not going to have the luxury to take that hardware we have today to Gateway and to Mars.
More to that data point of one. On our flight, we were pressing it was with the team on the ground as well. We got the chance to do sort of new resistive exercise equipment on orbit, which worked for a while, worked pretty well, which I believe is turning out to be key in some of the bone density and basically large muscle groups and soft tissue maintenance while you're on orbit. Data point of one, I got back from our flight, which was ideally not a long space flight, but I asked our flight surgeon the day after I landed if I could drive the crew van around the crew quarters in Florida. This was about 25 hours after landing, and I jumped in the truck and was driving around, and I could do it. I was not keen on quick stops, but I could maneuver, and I got away from that experience after doing it for about 10 minutes and said, we could be on a long duration space mission, zero gravity, go to Mars, land, and people could get out, and we could do this. It is a workable capability. So I think those kinds of if you will, exercise resources are going to be hugely important. And for Joel's team, how do we do it on Artemis?
Good question. Let's see, anyone online want to have a response? Put your hand up. Okay, Yuri?
So, and I would like to say that, of course, we now know in general medical risks, flight to the moon and to Mars. We do the science, we develop some countermeasures and medical devices and medicines, and we have a risk that, in my opinion, that when we will be on Mars and when we will have some medical issue and we will advise the crew member to take some medicines, and if these medicines will not be effective for this person. Of course, we tested it on the Earth, but it may be a risk that this person will not be affected by these current medicines. So maybe this is a problem.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else online? All right, did you have a follow-up question? I think we interrupted you.
No, I was just thinking that talking about the idea. So that is some equipment that we have to have that for psychological support of the crew on Gateway. Well, it's a joke when we were talking about alcohol. So
the program manager says no alcohol.
Joel, let me jump in just a second. For those of you that want it, we do have continuous interpretation by very expert interpreters up there of the Russian to English. I think there's been a problem with that channel, but I think it's fixed now. So anybody that throughout the rest of the the ISMS, if you want to be able to understand the Russian, there's live translation all the time.
Okay. Let's see. We'll go back to questions in the room. If not, I have a list. All right. Oh, Liz, go ahead.
To pull on something that Shep said earlier, we've got this amazing laboratory in orbit. We're getting actually some really fantastic scientific results that are meaningful not only for enabling for future space exploration, but for bettering life here on Earth. And NASA is putting out all kinds of information, but it's kind of like a push only, and without the pull from mass media or the public that are interested. Boy, we have a hard time getting that information out there. Any ideas on how better to communicate just how amazing our laboratory in low Earth orbit is?
Could I talk to that for a second? One of the things that was done early on in the space station program, before any hardware was really up there, there was an initiative for the ISS program to have some focus on educational outreach. The answer to that problem that you state is you can't push it from the top down. You gotta attack the problem at the grassroots and build it up. So the interest that can be generated at very early levels in the educational system, I think, is critically important to answering that question.
Honestly, so when we were up there on orbit, we filmed the first 8K video, which was, we kind of did parts of that on a whim, and that was really because Alex Gerst was a wizard at utilizing that camera, which we get training on the ground, but from his first flight, he used it. We used it the second flight, and then he kind of explained about how to do B-roll footage and everything. I'd never thought I'd be doing this on ISS, but you realize you have to market. I don't care who you are. There has to be some form of advertising, even if you're the space station, in a way that can connect with folks. And it wasn't until one day that I walked into a Best Buy to look at a television that my husband wanted to buy, and I saw our video being played. And the guy looked at us and said, "That was filmed in space." And I said, "I know." So, but when you looked at it afterwards, we realized not many people have 8K televisions. We'll get there. You know, but it was only 2 minutes long. That's it. That's all you need, and you can inspire. And no one was speaking. It was all just actions. But people could see, and they felt like they were connected to the science and to the people up there. So, advertising, absolutely.
Okay. You know, the other part that I have seen drawn people in. I don't know if I think you got to go to the Infinite when it came, and it was this 3D, for those of you that haven't seen it, it's coming back to Houston. I'm going to go again for the 5th time. I cried and I fogged up my glasses, and it was horrifying. But it is, I took a group of students there who didn't have familiarity with the ISS, and they actually cried because, you know, they got to see the Earth and see the beauty. And then after that, then they started go, oh, I want to learn more about it. And how does this benefit me? And benefits for humanity. Google that. Okay. So I think it's a combination of just that initial spark to get people to pull for information so that we don't have to push.
Awesome. Chris, did you want to add something?
I think that the point that I would like to add is that I think communicating technical information in a way that people can understand is a true skill, and something that people have to learn in many cases. And I think that we sometimes do ourselves a disservice when we use our jargon and all of our terms, because we cannot effectively communicate what we're trying to say to the larger population and audience. I think that our message gets lost, or they listen to us and they don't understand what we're saying, and then they stop listening. And so I think that another key thing that we could do better every day is to be better science communicators and technology and information and engineering communicators.
Awesome point. Awesome point. Let's see. I think we had a question in the room here.
just one.
Oh, wait, we had a hand online. We'll go with Ginger online, and then we'll go back to your question, if that's okay. Go ahead, Ginger.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to add to what Chris said. We do a really good job of communicating technical information from station to each other, to people who already know about and care about space. I think what's lacking a bit is telling people who don't know about space, communicating to a broader audience, making the connections wider and more broadly. How is space relevant for people who are not particularly interested in space or have never known anything about it? That, I think if we could broaden our reach, it would serve all of us very well.
Good point. Thank you. Anyone else online? If not, we'll go to the room here for questions. Okay, please go ahead.
I don't know if this works. I was just curious if you guys had any thoughts on, for long duration spaceflight, hibernating, the concept of, just the muscle being metabolically demanding, just kind of leaning into what the body does, and then essentially retraining as you get closer to the destination.
We'll start there. I've got my thoughts.
Were you able to hear that question online?
Yeah, just repeat it.
Okay, all right, they were able to hear it. I'm not authorized to answer that one. So.
Okay, I'll start on that one. So we're giggling here because there have been presentations and ideas from universities looking at that very issue, some sort of hibernation, slowing of the metabolic demand by the human to maybe decrease consumables needed during a trip, a very long trip, perhaps out to Mars. I mean, it's not a bad idea. I'll start with that. Of course, you're going to look at any way to enhance, maybe decrease the amount of consumables, because we're just not going to have a lot of space, mass, room. Right. I will tell you from the human standpoint, you can't ignore the behavioral aspect of doing something like that, right? Of putting a crew in a semi-hibernated state to get out to a destination. Certainly, we've never done that before in the history of mankind, so you don't want to test that your first time on the way out to Mars. But, if you've ever worked in hospitals, they were talking about using a medication called Precedex to do that. And that is something we use in ICUs to sedate people, either in alcohol withdrawal or just to keep them in a state that's awake, somewhat alert, but sedated. And so when I first heard these presentations, I thought, you are crazy. Mostly because, number one, we've never done that long-term on the human. But number two, as the crew, you understand it's a long trip. The behavioral impacts are far-reaching on something like that. I don't know that you would ever get crew buy-in to do something like that. Personal opinion. So.
Hey, I'd like to ask Dr. Butler, who probably has some experience with this in combat care, whether putting people under for prolonged periods of time is something he's familiar with, and what are some of the issues?
It doesn't happen a lot. Oh, thank you. It doesn't happen a lot, but let's say that you have somebody who is badly wounded, and as part of their reaction to their wounds, they sort of come apart and become very agitated, thrash around, want to fight with the medic. It can be a real problem for the medics out there, and that's why God made ketamine. We have used that, and we also use benzodiazepines, drugs like Valium or Versed, very well. But if we have somebody that is out of control on a combat mission, we turn fairly quickly to solving that problem with chemicals.
I wanted to build off of what Serena was saying. Every idea is crazy until suddenly it's not. Right now, this one is kind of crazy. Someday, that could change. But to the point that was just made, we do sedate people in the hospitals, and it's kind of the closest thing, I guess you could say, to hibernation that people do right now. And those folks have tubes coming out of every part of their body, and they have teams of people who take care of them constantly. And so the reality right now is that we don't have anywhere near the technology or the knowledge that we would need to be able to do it. But if you like science fiction, there's a book called Project Hail Mary, and in the beginning of the book, there's this magical robot that does all of those things for you and puts all the tubes where they need to be and takes care of you while you are sedated, for lack of a better term. And these types of technologies, they can start to be developed, but they are very, very, very early on in their development phases, so early that we're not realistically looking at any of these technologies for missions that are conceivable within the near future.
Okay, thank you. Anyone online want to answer? If not, we'll go to another question in the room. Okay, we'll go back to the room here. All right, well, I have questions. So we'll go back to Ginger in the room here. What is the most impactful way space station research is making a difference in exploration missions beyond low Earth orbit?
So there are a lot of things that we need to resolve before we can comfortably say we're ready to go to Mars. I know there are companies out there that think we're ready, and yeah, maybe for a one-way trip. But things like a completely closed-loop water system. When Shep first flew, we didn't have that, and we were having to send up bags of water on the shuttle and tanks of water on our Russian side. We still send up some tanks of water on our Russian side, but we have closed loop, done a really good job between reclamation systems and we take the urine and you take the brine out of it and even squeeze the brine to get every last drop of fluid out there. So that's one good way, one good example of how that is research. We are trying out different technologies. We talked about exercise before. Frank Rubio recently, we have always used that treadmill. Every time we've had a treadmill, we want to use that treadmill. And we recognize that's not feasible in the current design architecture for Artemis. So how can we don't know what's going to happen if the astronaut doesn't use the treadmill. So Frank was the first one not to, and he used the bicycle and he used the ARED machine, and we're going to learn from that and see. So there are a lot of different things that we're doing to enable, and the examples I've given are really just how can we make sure the crew is alive, it can thrive, when we land on the surface of Mars finally, can they get up and walk and take care of themselves and make sure that they're autonomous. So there's a lot of things, many examples like that, but those are just a few.
Awesome, thank you. One more time for questions in the room. If not, we'll go to Chris for a question. All right, Chris, what do you think the future holds for commercial research in space medicine aboard the International Space Station? And has commercial research helped medical advancement? Hurt it? What do you think about that?
I think that the commercial research has a lot of potential to help medical advancement. And I think there's kind of two categories here which are interesting. There's commercial space companies who want to develop their own capabilities for research purposes. They want to have platforms on their vehicles or future stations that they can use for research purposes. But then they also want to develop new medical procedures and new medical technologies that they'll be able to use for their missions going forward. So commercial space companies are now starting to look at human research and medical research as an area that they need to develop a portfolio and a capability in. And starting with station, that's where a lot of those capabilities and plans come from. But then there's the other side of this coin, which are the really large commercial companies that don't really know how to use space and are learning how to use space for their purposes. And so examples here, we've talked a little bit about protein crystallization, the pharmaceutical companies that are looking to refine their drug formulations or come up with new drugs for treating new conditions is very promising. A company called Redwire is partnering with a number of other companies to grow things in space that people may need, and so they've basically used a bioprinter to make a meniscus in space, and they have lots of plans for things like that in the future. So I think we need to foster not only the commercial companies who want to figure out how to use space and don't know how for medical research, but then we also have to do everything we can to assist those commercial space companies that are trying to develop their own medical research platforms and capabilities.
Awesome. Thank you. You know, two questions now. We'll go, she had the lady in the back had her hand up first, and then we'll go to you.
Thank you. My question comes back to who I am. We were wondering, you guys have been growing plants for a while on space station, and it's imperative, I think, for long-duration space flights like to Mars that we have better capabilities. And for those that don't know in the audience, we've been working on plants in space since the 1980s. So this is not a new issue, and Kennedy has done huge amounts of work in this area. So what are the issues, and is it possible to grow more than, one salad a week or whatever it is?
So I will say growing plants was one of our most favorite things to do. In fact, for me, I could stick my head, and they're probably not supposed to hear this, I would stick my head inside the little plant growth area because I could smell the earth. Yep. It smelled like planet Earth. And so to me, behaviorally, that was hugely important. And we talked about, why can't we take an entire rack and grow plants? And just so you all know, when we would harvest, most of that harvest was sent back down to the ground, and the crew would be like, can we eat it? And so whether or not we showed them or turned the camera at the last second and pulled some of those basil leaves or whatever it is, it didn't matter. It would be kale, the most bitter thing ever. We didn't care because it was alive, right? And remember, most of the food we eat up there. So there's so many benefits. I agree with you. Just not only, augmenting the food supply to, could it even be medicinal to a certain degree, to behavioral for the crew. And just can't underestimate how important it was behaviorally. We had a little happy hour one night where we had little tiny kale leaves, and we got soy sauce out of the food kit, and that was the neatest thing we'd done in the last month. Besides all the science, right? But that's what we did as a crew. That was very important to us, so I agree.
Anyone else want to add anything? From a program standpoint, we need, if we're going to go outside of low Earth orbit, we need to step it up in that area. I'd also like us to see to be less conservative in letting the crew eat some of the things rather than bringing everything home. I think we can. There's a risk line there that maybe we can draw a little different. All right, young lady, you had a question?
How does international collaboration with astronaut health work? Like, say, countries without astronauts in space, are they able to gain any access into astronaut health from other countries?
Yeah, so I'll start, and I'm sure other people add. So yeah, I agree. So international education in aerospace medicine, space medicine, has been a challenge, at least for opportunities for folks in other countries. Some countries like Canada, University of Toronto, are coming online with programs. And certainly when you're trying to learn about space health, in essence, there are a lot of different educational opportunities, this conference being one of the biggest ones, but the Aerospace Medicine Association meeting, there's several ways to get involved from an educational level to begin to learn about that subject. And then whether you're interested in clinical care or research, usually the family is small enough that we can point you in the right direction. So Chris, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I'm from Canada, so as an international, there were no formal aerospace medicine training programs that were open to me. I was not allowed to take any of the formal training that existed. And so I had to make my own training program, for lack of a better term. And I think that as the international community grows in these areas, each of the different countries and different regions is starting to try and identify best available opportunities to create new educational opportunities, but also ways for people to gain experience and knowledge. And so there's something called the Space Generation Advisory Council. And in SGAC, there is a Space Medicine and Life Sciences Working Group. And that is a group of international students and young professionals who are trying to develop those opportunities and to gain knowledge and experience in the field in different ways. So I think that finding ways to partner more with those types of organizations will go a long way to opening doors for people who may not have access to some of the programs that only exist here in the U.S. for U.S. people.
I'll also add that we're making a conscious effort to open up space station bigger than the 5 partner agencies. We just had a UAE astronaut fly for a full 6-month expedition on board. The private astronaut missions we are doing are bringing in more and more countries. We're seeing that, what they're seeing is there's not a lot of rich people out there that want to fly, but there's a lot of countries that want to fly people. And that allows them to bring into the 5 partner agency that we have on space station, and I think it's just going to continue to get bigger and bigger. All right, and let's see, Ginger, online, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I wanted to extend what you're talking about just a little bit. The NASA Gene Lab has really expanded opportunities for people outside of NASA to be able to work with real space life sciences data collected from flight. And that, I've been doing this with some of my own students here in France, and that is really, it's powerful for the students to get real space data in their hands and look at it and analyze it themselves. It's game changing. It makes it very real that the ISS is a real laboratory. And even if you're not from the United States, you can work with this information and you can advance your scientific career using it.
Awesome, thank you. Let's go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to kind of add on to that, and I was going to talk about the Gene Lab and the ALSDA, which is all animal and cellular data, so it is readily publicly available. But I would also submit that there are human data archives that are managed at Johnson Space Center, both medical data archives and research data archives, that can then be made available. So as you get integrated within the community and there are questions that you're interested in partnering with others to answer and so forth, those data can be made available. There's a little bit more complicated process for getting human data than there is for getting animal or cellular data, but they are publicly available, and so that is one other way that people can get involved as well. Unfortunately, as a U.S. government agency, there are some countries that we cannot collaborate with, but for the most part, there are countries we can, and we do release data regularly. So if you want to talk during the break or whatever, be happy to.
Awesome. Let's see, we'll go back to my list here. Liz brought up the question of, what can we do to generate interest in the general public? So this next one is Serena. What, based on your experience, is there a favorite fact or something you did on orbit that you would like this group to know or the general public to know when you go out and leave this conference?
Yeah, so I kind of think about how to best answer this question, and I think the general public wants to know, is it really hard for astronauts to get their own data when they fly? Blood, urine, feces, saliva, right? Looking at everything, how hard is that? So let me give you a rank list from green to red, right? Saliva, easy. These are little salivettes we just put right under our tongue. I can give you that in 60 seconds, no problem. We'll move up the chain, okay? Blood, which a lot of people think that's got to be the hardest thing we do, blood draws on orbit. We get pretty good. I'd say it's, mild to moderate difficulty. We work in pairs, but we know this is important science, and we got every blood draw we needed to in orbit, and there are a lot. Kind of going up from there, we'll go to ultrasound. Again, we get pretty good at ultrasound images, whether they are of the eyes, vessels, you name it. You give us an image we need to copy, and all crew members get very, very proficient. Realize this is remote guided ultrasound, so we have experts who are very patient, a shot on the ground, who has seen me roll my eyes a million times because there's that slight enough of a time lag that he says to stop, and I'm just a millimeter past that. Feces, actually surprisingly easy, right? So we have the toilet on ISS, and because of surface tension forces, that fecal matter sticks to that plastic bag, and you just take your little ice cream scooper and plop it up and store it. This is the reality, right? It's pretty easy. What is hard? Urine. Very hard. And so if any of you were in my debriefs after I landed, I vented a lot about this because I did 7 24-hour urine collections during my time on orbit. And when you're a woman and you are trying to urinate in a bag with a hole that big, that is ninja level work. Okay? And it's hard. And that's just due to equipment, and it's due to microgravity, and it's, what is difficult. And so I was as a physician, I'm fairly graphic on why things are difficult, right? You have to use mirrors, you have to use all kinds of things to collect that data. But it's important for science. But if we can continue to kind of improve that equipment, it'll make it easy. But the crew does a pretty darn good job of getting every fluid out to give us that data back on Earth. So I thought that'd be fun to talk about.
That was perfect.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who gets to go next.
That might need to be our last one. That's a good one.
Let's see, I do think we just have a few more minutes for one more speaker to talk here. And so let me open up to anyone have any closing comments here? If not, we'll hand over to our online folks, and then I'll pick, if nobody has anything, I'll just pick one person. Anyone here in the room want to close with? All right, anyone online want to close with something? All right, well then I think we should close with the Expedition 1 commander. And so, again, a huge, 25 years, 23 years of continuous human presence on board the International Space Station, and we're not stopping. So, Shep, any final thoughts, anything that you would like to tell us that, hey, here's some things that I want you guys to go think about?
Well, to be fair, most of us panelists have seen the questions in advance. And I was supposed to be asked what excites me most about medical research in the future. And that was that on a long space mission like to Mars, we're going to be at least 20 to 40 minutes away from the video, the data, and the doctors. And I'm pretty excited about that. But more seriously, the thing that impresses me the most about what we're doing, after having seen lots of events in strange circumstances, is the general adaptability of humans. I'm really impressed with what we can do, and I think the research that we're doing right now will allow us to accelerate that adaptation. I think that's a big part of the future.
Awesome. Well, a huge thank you to the panel. Huge thank you to you for participating. These don't work without questions from the crowd. So thank you guys very much. Again, working on Space Station, the coolest job in the world, right? And the fact that we're celebrating 25 years and not slowing down is just awesome. And so a huge thank you to you. I'll hand it back over to the, who am I handing over to? All right.
We don't know you.
Okay.
But that was a great session, and so we now have a 15-minute break, and you're welcome to get up and stretch and go out into the common area if you like. Thanks.